Happy International Women's Day. Ladies, we love you. You're awesome. You make the world a much, much, much better place. But we need to have a conversation. Consider this an intervention, ladies. We got to have a talk. You see, you have a lot of the qualities that make you awesome personally in relationships and as mothers. Uh, Also make you make terrible choices politically. And this is what we need to talk about today, ladies, because, well, you're a menace to society. You're a menace to the world around you and to yourselves, and consider this an intervention. Now, it's not just me that's saying that you are a menace to society. Recently, there was a poll that came out that confirms it, that people believe, the majority of people believe, that it's specifically white women that are a threat, a menace to society. And it's your political choices that make you a menace to society, that are a threat to peace. And this video is going to attempt to explain that. So before you get all up in my face and start adding me with you're a misogynist and you're a hater and this and that and the other thing, just take a deep breath and please listen to what I have to say about this issue. Now on screen you'll see there's a poll by YouGov that basically states that 41% of respondents thought that white women were a greater threat to world peace than the four other douchebags on screen. Now, you might be scratching your head and thinking to yourself, well, how the hell is that possible? Well, let me explain it to you. Uh, the guy that was in power had those four motherfuckers on the right all boxed in. For the 4 years that he was in charge, neither of those four guys was doing shit. And you voted him out of power. And the minute Sleepy Joe Biden took over, all four of those motherfuckers started acting up again. I mean, the one guy on the right, Vladimir Putin, he started a war. The guy on the furthest to the right is saber rattling how he wants to start a war. And the guy on the left, little Kim, he's launching nuclear weapons over Japan again. So, and this is not hyperbole, ladies. I mean, we have exit polls from MSNBC that show you are responsible for this. You took the guy who was in power, who had those four bastards boxed in, and you took him out of power because he was saying some things that were mean, and we can't have mean words. So this is kind of all on you. Now look at this next graphic, okay? This is the election results if only women voted, okay? As you can see here, it's a blowout. The Democrats would win in a fucking blowout, okay? There's no reason for this. There should be a distribution of votes throughout the two parties based on sex. It shouldn't be such a one-sided, lopsided result. This has to do with the way your psychology is built, the way you're built as an animal. There's reasons to this, and I'm going to break it down for you so you can understand what I'm talking about. So please hold on. Now, before we get into the scientific breakdown as to what causes women to vote the way that they do and make the choices that they do, I think it'd be wise to take a moment just to see a real world example of the consequences of the choices that you make, ladies, and how you're not only a menace to broader society, you're also a menace to yourselves.
We showed you tape last night that was so awful that we hesitated before putting it on. It's terrifying. A hit and driver in Los Angeles last August. A 16-year-old stole a car and intentionally ran over a woman who was pushing her 8-month-old son in a stroller. We're going to show you again. It's disturbing. Before we put it on the screen, though, we should tell you that the mother and child are well, but it's still awful to see. And you should also know the LA Soros-backed District Attorney, George Gascon, has announced the guy who did this will receive a sentence of only 5 months in a, quote, diversionary program. Now, the mother who was injured in that attack is, of course, outraged. Obviously, what does it say about the value of her life? She is requested to refer to her only by her first name, Rachel. We're honored to have her join us now. Rachel, thanks so much for
Thanks
coming
for
on.
having me, Tucker.
So that tape is really, we actually debated whether to put it on. It's that awful. I can't even imagine how you feel when how do you feel when you see that?
At this point, I'm pretty numb to it. I watched it about, I'd say at least 1,000 times. I've still shot at it to see, did I do what I thought I did? Did I do everything I could to protect my child? And thankfully, I think I did.
Yes.
But it was very tough to watch at first. Made me very sick. But I'm okay now watching it.
It seems very obvious, and I'm just looking on the screen right now. There's space for him to avoid you and your son, but it looks like he did it on purpose.
Absolutely, he did it on purpose. I made eye contact with him as he was approaching us. I screamed for him to stop. There was plenty of room. 2 cars can fit. It's a one-way street, so it's meant for just one car. But there are cars that can park on the side of the road, and there's still plenty of room for another car to pass.
So anyone who would mow down a mother and her baby in a stroller on purpose is someone who should be locked far away from the rest of us, no?
Absolutely, and I just learned from Bill Malusian on Sunday that the kid had a felony record already and was out on probation when he hit me.
So how do you, this is almost a rhetorical question, how do you feel about what George Gascon has done? What message does that send?
It sends a lot of messages. It sends messages to criminals that, it's okay to do bad things because we're not going to punish you. We're going to punish the victims instead. I'm just beside myself with the comments that he's come out with on Twitter, citing that, California law says that the punishment is fair, when in fact it's his policies that he put into place that prevent us from getting appropriate justice.
Yeah, he assigns no value to your life or your son's life at all, it feels like.
No. He can take the time to tweet about it and make this a political thing, which it's not. I'd like to admit I'm a Democrat, and I voted for George Gascon. I was raised in a Republican family, so I'm pretty centrist, but I lean left.
And there you go. She voted for this. This is what she wanted. And she got it.
Did I do everything I could to protect my child?
And she asks herself, did I do the best for my child? No, you didn't. You voted for this chaos. This chaos is what you decided to give your child, and you're lucky both of you survived. Now, you may be saying, well, you're being a little bit hyperbolic here. How could she have possibly have known that, voting for Gascon would eventually lead to this, right? Well, she's going to touch upon that a little bit later on. We're going to play that video for you. But, what do you think Ronald Reagan and all the Republicans were doing when they were posting those Willie Orton ads in the 80s and the 90s, talking about the soft on crime policies of the Democrats? What do you think? That this is a problem that's been going on for decades now. I don't know if you recall, but the murder rates in Los Angeles and New York in the early 90s after Democratic, administrations, longtime Democratic administrations, the murder rates in both those cities were in the high thousands. So, over 1,000 people were being murdered in those cities each year, and the shootings were way above that. Who do you think? What do you think this war on gangs and violence was in the 90s that everybody thinks back on as this terrible, terrible time of racism? What do you think it was? It was to counter democratic policies. So this isn't a new phenomenon that just cropped up in the last couple of years. This is a decades-old problem. Every jurisdiction run by Democrats is rampant with crime. These are democratic policies. So she basically voted for this to happen to her. I know a lot of you are saying, well, you're blaming the victim. Well, you know what? She caused the problem by her and her ilk who vote for Democrats.
I'd like to admit I'm a Democrat, and I voted for George Gascon. I was raised in a Republican family, so I'm pretty centrist, but I lean left. And, I voted for this guy because I believe that, our prisons do need some reform, but rewarding criminals, violent criminals for their actions is very far from from any kind of reformation that anybody would think is appropriate.
And look, don't get me wrong. I totally sympathize with this woman. I am too a moderate leftist. I'm a moderate liberal. I can totally understand where she's coming from, but you think she would have woken up by now? I mean, it's the liberal parties and the Democrats have all been moving steadily leftward for a very, very, very long time now. Okay, this didn't just happen out of the blue. Okay, as you can see here, we have a couple of polls. Well, I don't know if they're polls, but they're research from The Economist and Pew, both reputable sources that have basically documented the Democratic Party's leftward drift for decades now, and they've gone far left, way further left than the Republicans have gone right. Okay, so I mean, you think you would have clued in by now. I mean, it's not new what's been happening. There's been a decade of radical leftist activism within liberal parties, the Democratic Party, that have taken a far hard right-left turn. Starting back in, the 2011, 2012 with the BLM movements and the transgender movement, which just came out of nowhere. And so, like, where have you been the last decade? Like, have you been in a coma? Have you been trapped underneath a rock? Like, I can understand where you're coming from, but I mean, if you haven't been paying attention to what's been going on for the last 12 years, the last 10, 12 years, then you have your head up your own ass. And the problem with this, the problem with women specifically, is they tend to be, they have this trait. According to Jordan Peterson, they're more agreeable than men are. So that makes them intensely feel others' emotions. They're more caring, they're more empathetic, more compassionate, more sympathetic. They respect authority more. They're not pushy. They don't impose themselves onto others. So they're more agreeable. And what ends up happening is this heightened trait agreeableness means that they're more often open to exploitation and manipulation. And that's what the leftist parties do. They craft these policies to exploit women's agreeable nature, and they end up getting these psychotic policies. So I'm going to put on a clip of Jordan Peterson. He can explain it better than I can.
If you intensely feel others' emotions, if you're always inquiring about how others are doing, and you actually care, rather than doing it for the sake of show, if you're capable of sympathizing with other people, if you respect authority, if you don't like to seem or be pushy, and you don't like to impose your will on others, then you're an agreeable person. Extremely agreeable people are empathetic and compassionate and compliant. But the downside of that is that they are not that good at standing up for themselves, and so they're often manipulated and pushed around. For example, they're not as good at negotiating for their own salaries. If you ask a disagreeable person what he wants, say, or she wants, they'll tell you right away. They know. It's like, this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to get it. But agreeable people, especially if they're really agreeable, are so agreeable that they often don't even know what they want, because they're so accustomed to living for other people and to finding out what other people want and to trying to make them comfortable and so forth, that it's harder for them to find a sense of their own desires as they move through life. And that's not, look, there's situations where that's advantageous, but it's certainly not advantageous if you're going to try to forge yourself a career. That just doesn't work at all. One of the things you have to be careful of if you're agreeable is not to be exploited, because you'll line up to be exploited. And I think the reason for that is because you're wired to be exploited by infants. And so that just doesn't work so well in that actual world. And one of the things that happens very often in psychotherapy, people come to psychotherapy for multiple reasons, but one of them is they often come because they're too agreeable. And so what they get is so-called assertiveness training, although it's not exactly assertiveness that's being trained. What it is the ability to learn how to negotiate on your own behalf. And one of the things I tell agreeable people, especially if they're conscientious, is say what you think. Tell the truth about what you think. There's going to be things you think that you think are nasty and harsh, and they probably are nasty and harsh, but they're also probably true. And you need to bring those up to the forefront and deliver the message. And it's not straightforward at all, because agreeable people do not like conflict. Not at all. They smooth the water. You know, and you can see why that is in accordance with the hypothesis that I've been putting forward. You don't want conflict around infants. It's too damn dangerous. You don't want fights to break out. You don't want anything to disturb the relative peace. You know, and if you're also more prone to being hurt physically and perhaps emotionally, you're also maybe loath to engage in the kind of high intensity conflict that will solve problems in the short term, because it takes a lot of conflict to solve problems in the short term. And you know, if that can spiral up to where it's dangerous, which it can if it gets uncontrolled, it might be safer in the short term to keep the waters smooth and to not delve into those situations where conflict emerges. The problem with that is it's not a very good medium to long-term strategy, right? Because lots of times there are things you have to talk about because they're not going to go away. Our society is at the moment tilted towards regarding agreeableness as a virtue, you know, because you should be kind and you should be empathetic and you should be compassionate and all those sorts of things. But our research, this isn't published yet because it's complicated to communicate and we haven't figured out how to do it yet, but what we've found is that if you push any of the traits too far, they fall off a cliff fundamentally.
So there you have it. Women's agreeable nature, which evolved out of a requirement to be kind and nurturing for infants and young children and for the sick and elderly, predisposes women to be kind, to be generous, sympathetic, compassionate, but can also be dangerous if it is not reined in. And what we've had is decades of women voting with their hearts, and God bless you, we love that about you, but it's a dangerous, dangerous way to vote, because what you end up doing is voting for policies that endanger women and small children. For example, immigration. We've had immigration that has been promoted in the West for decades now, since the 90s. And we've had situations like in Sweden where they've opened their bleeding hearts to all the people of the world. And you've had rape that is skyrocketed. I mean, look at this example here. Ellen Krantz, she was a member of the We Like Diversity Facebook page, and she was followed off a streetcar one night by an immigrant here, pictured on the right. She was raped and murdered. You can see the results of her sympathy and her compassion laying all over this forested area. How did that work out for Ellen? Or you can look at what happened in the UK. You've had decades of immigration from third world nations, and the result was up to 1 million British children victims of Muslim rape gangs. Pakistani Muslim men who would, basically they would target white, Sikh, and Hindu girls for sexual exploitation. They're euphemistically called grooming gangs in the UK. If you put that in a search engine, you'll find all sorts of results. But basically, they were rape gangs, and they raped thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of girls. And in some of these cases, the Pakistani men who were raping those girls raped them because they deemed them subhuman, because they were not Muslim. So how is that sympathy working out for you, ladies? You basically condemned generations of girls to sexual torture and victimization because, you can't, rein in some of your agreeableness and vote conservative. And here's another example. This woman, Pimple Backus, she's a feminist artist. She decided she was going to travel to the Middle East because she wanted to promote world peace and the marriage between different peoples and nations. And what happened to her? She was raped. Some people say she was gang raped and murdered. So this is not hyperbole when I say you're a danger to yourselves and others. I'm not trying to be provocative. I'm just trying to show you that your personality traits as women and your voting record has made the world less safe and more dangerous for women and small children. So maybe next time at election time, instead of voting left, you change your minds or think about it and vote right for once. Happy International Women's Day.
I'd like to admit I'm a Democrat, and I voted for
Yes.
George Gascon.